She said she would. But how benign are Theresa May's policies in reality? Joining me now from Bordeaux in southwestern France is journalist Vanessa Beeley. She's recently been in Syria, where she's been investigating UK government ties to what British mainstream media has for so long called moderate rebels. Vanessa, thanks for being on Going Underground. Just before we go to Syria, what about Theresa May condemning the blockade of the ports in Yemen? Surely a sign of UK good intentions in the Middle East?
Unfortunately, I can't agree that the UK has any good intentions in the Middle East whatsoever. They've been responsible in Yemen for maintaining the blockade through the UN Security Council Resolution 2216 that has effectively used an illegitimate basis for its resolution, the legitimacy of the twice resigned President Hadi, to maintain a blockade, a humanitarian blockade against the Yemeni people. And we know that the British government successively have been profiting from the military-industrial complex trade with Saudi Arabia and are also determining targets in the Riyadh Command and Control Centre. So any faux pretensions of humanitarian interests in Yemen fall very flat as far as I'm concerned.
I should say the government deny that they're involved in the targeting. They're just involved in the training of those targeting. Let's just go on to Syria then. I mean, you've done so much work, I should say, that we've often relied on some of your work because you've been in Syria recently. Surely you're happy now that the state-mandated BBC has finally vindicated some of your work and said that the UK taxpayer is funding Islamist terrorists that basically can be linked all the way back to Osama bin Laden and the destruction of the Twin Towers. That's who the British taxpayer funds, and that's what the BBC's found.
I think it's very interesting that 7 years into the conflict, the BBC, which up until now has been very clearly colluding with the British state narrative, which is effectively to demonize the Syrian state, the Syrian leadership, and the Syrian National Army, the Syrian Arab Army, and its allies, of course. It's taken them 7 years, apparently, to discover this link between UK Foreign Office funding and terrorist factions inside Syria, when, to be fair, organisations like RT, like Sputnik, independent analysts and investigative journalists have been pointing this out for the last 6 years. So it's, let's say, the BBC are rather late coming to the party here.
BBC deny, of course, any collusion and would accuse the outlets, including this channel, of just being pro-Russian propaganda and de facto pro-Turkey and Iran and the Syrian government.
Yeah, of course. But what we've actually seen, I believe, in this BBC Panorama programme is effectively a controlled detonation, a controlled media detonation. They've reduced what is a mountain of evidence down to a molehill, effectively. They focused in on the Free Syrian Police. They've completely ignored the white helmets that I've been investigating for the last 3 years that run are run by a very similar operation of UK Foreign Office funding via intermediaries, both externally and on the ground in Syria, and who work alongside the Free Syrian Police. But not only the white helmets, the local councils, all of these entities, these what I would call shadow state entities inside Syria, are being funded by very similar processes as the Free Syrian Police. But the focus of the BBC Panorama programme was entirely on the Free Syrian Police and, of course, on Adam Smith International, that has a history of back-channel corruption, profiteering from aid contracts, which has been extensively documented by even mainstream media in the UK.
OK, but what you said about the white helmets footage is still routinely used. It was used on the night of that Panorama programme that we're talking about. Why are they protected by the mainstream media here?
I think the word you used is absolutely correct. They are being protected, and I honestly believe that this BBC Panorama programme, let's remember BBC Panorama's history in Syria. Let's remember Saving Syria's Children and Robert Stewart's forensic analysis of that entire report and its potential to be nothing more than propaganda. So I genuinely believe this BBC Panorama programme is to create a scapegoat, which is the Free Syrian Police, Adam Smith International in this case, while ignoring, for me, the much more important concept of the white helmet. Now, if we compare the white helmet concept to, for example, the KLA, which morphed into the Kosovo Security Corps in Kosovo, it's a very similar process. We're seeing the British government colluding with Al-Qaeda affiliates inside Syria. We're seeing running alongside those the White Helmet organization, which we know works hand in hand with Nusra Front and various other extremist entities inside Syria. It acts as a human shield. It acts as a protection for those terrorist entities. It acts as a camouflage for the atrocities that they are committing against the Syrian people. So I think we're not seeing a protection of the white helmets themselves per se inside Syria. What we're seeing is a protection of the global concept. We're seeing the white helmets appearing in Brazil, in Venezuela, in Malaysia, in the Philippines. So this is not a Syria-centric issue, Afshan. This is a global issue. They're protecting the concept. They're protecting it to be fit for purpose for future military interventions.
What, it's as if they learned from the 1980s version of the death squads, US death squads, of course, in Latin and Central America, into what you seem to be suggesting is a whole new PR dimension to...
Absolutely. Look, if we look at the process, if we look at what I believe the white helmets do, first of all, they infiltrated the country. They built upon sectarian divisions that may or may not have existed. They gained the trust. I mean, James Mazurier, who's the ex-military British trainer of the White Helmets, has said very clearly, the one entity that people will trust are the fire brigade or the first responders or the humanitarian organizations, hence the creation of the White Helmets in 2013. So we see them infiltrate, but then we also see them being earmarked for reconstructing Syria after the conflict ends. So securing British government carpetbagging rights inside Syria, let's say. And then this entire process will be repeated, sort of repeat spin cycle elsewhere in other global interventions. And one thing that I wanted to make clear, Afshan, the talk has been about this funding stream through Adam Smith International to the Free Syrian Police. But what has been completely ignored in this program is the 200 million that has gone from the Conflict, Stability and Security Fund into the euphemistically called Syrian opposition. And I received the actual breakdown of this 200 million.
This is the Conflict, Stability and Security Fund?
Yes. 18 million into peace building and track 2 operations, 32 million to moderate armed groups. Now, they're claiming it's non-lethal aid, but how are they vetting these moderately armed groups or these moderate extremist groups? Safety, security and stability. Now, that, of course, includes the Free Syrian Police and the White Helmets, 54 million. They're making the claims that the White Helmets have saved 100,000 lives. Where is the documentation and the accountability for this claim? They're also claiming that they are helping, partnering 7 million people inside Syria. Well, that's over 35% of the population that remains inside Syria. I would also challenge that claim. Then we go on to political support, 14 million. Government livelihood and education in a country that Britain shouldn't really be involved in under international law, 39 million. Strategic communications, 23 million, which claims to empower the moderate voices. Now, this again, we know that funds have gone to an organisation, an NGO set up by ex-FCO employee Khan Ross, who was also involved in the Iraq conflict.
He's been on this show.
Exactly, who set up Independent Diplomat. We know through the Farah declarations that a certain number of millions have gone through Independent Diplomat, and we know Independent Diplomat have promoted the White Helmets in 2016. And then human rights and accountability, 20 million. This is to develop independent media organisations, for example, Basma Syria, that was set up by ARC Consultancy, who was also involved in the creation of the White Helmet. So, you know, when we look at the extent and the complexity of this funding operation by the British government, and the fact that if you put in a freedom of information request, they claim, of course, plausible deniability, that everything is being outsourced. So they cannot provide information to back up the claims that they are making, because it is all being outsourced, which of course then gives them, as we're seeing now with BBC Panorama, the plausible deniability in which they can back off and lay the blame onto Adam Smith International in this case.
We often cover austerity issues here, and you're talking about hundreds of millions of taxpayer pounds. The question arises, why on earth would the British government be making the British taxpayer fund people that are in effect linked to, you know, the person responsible for the bombing of the Manchester Arena or the Westminster bombing here? What does Britain get out of funding people like that?
This 200 million has been sent to the Syrian opposition with very little ability, apparently, to vet where that money actually goes to. And I've proven in my articles that it goes to terrorist organisations or to terrorist-run organisations, such as the local councils in East Aleppo, which again connected to Adam Smith funding via their Tamkeen project inside Syria. So we see a repeat of the same process as with the Free Syrian Police, but through the local councils. At the same time, while we are giving millions to the White Helmets, we're making severe cutbacks to our own fire brigades, for example, our own National Health Service. One of the reasons that Grenfell was such a hideous tragedy, and this was a statement made by the fire brigades themselves, was that because of various savage cutbacks, they were unable to respond in the way that they should have been able to respond. So this is an extraordinary situation where our own country is suffering from cutbacks, from austerity, from cutbacks in our own National Health Service. And yet here we are pouring millions into Syria, into the health and education, into an organisation like the White Helmets, which is questionable as to whether it is a terrorist-affiliated organisation or not. And as I said, we've seen it previously in Kosovo. And by the way, James Le Mesurier, who was the trainer of the White Helmets, was also present in Kosovo. We don't have coincidences here.
Vanessa, Beeley, thank you.